here's the interesting part that I think you guys missed, the meta portion of this. The very idea that this information is available on YouTube proves that the information that we are no longer under control of the federal government.
I don't know, Jordan, did you ever join us for the seed spitting in the cul-de-sac, the Wilhite cul-de-sac?
This is what happened. I came driving in on my nice Honda Civic without a hood.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, what are these guys doing? They're spitting in a cul-de-sac. And
it was a ritual.
I remember thinking you guys, your humor was more advanced than mine. Like, I was like, they're trying to portray this like old men sitting on the porch with shotguns feel or something. And I was like, man, I wish I understood the depth of these high schoolers.
There was no wisdom shared. It was literally just eating seeds in a circle so that we could spit a pile big enough that we could light it on fire. That was the goal. Like, if we get the pile big enough, we have firewood.
It probably was that, like, just absolutely base in our minds. But having Jordan say that just makes me wish that if it was possible that everybody's personality could be put into a display museum, and Jordan could walk up in front of somebody and like tilt his head and put his hand to his chin. He'd be the artistic impressions that he would extract from each person would be worth hearing so much. Because we literally were just sitting on lawn chairs in a cul-de-sac eating salty seeds. And Jordan's like, the commentary on the progression of life, the years behind them that they must be projecting into this experience. It's genius, I say.
Literally the only wisdom we were sharing was the fact that if you mixed barbecue spits with cracked pepper, it's delicious. Yeah. Like, that was like as deep as we got.
Dill pickle.
Yeah,
somebody
right.
was really to dill.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's Bry.
And another thing, Jordan, is there was somebody with you that day who is not traditionally with us in these experiences. And that was your cousin, Mike.
Mike Hughes.
Oh, yeah.
He was there for that. And I can't remember if he was, I want to believe that he was doing prank calls. And Brian, was this also during the same season where you experienced some literal backbiting?
What about the prank calls my cousin was doing?
I don't know. I don't know if that was the same year. It might have been the year after. It was that was senior year, just like weeks before graduation.
Oh, the stories.
Amazing.
Epic.
All right. Glory. Let's hail back to the cul-de-sac right now and discuss conspiracy theories. I have lots of them. I have thoughts tonight. I just think my thoughts are going to be pretty shallow this evening. I don't have any depth to share.
Spence, can you leave me some silence for just a brief second while I crack open this Shasta in front of the microphone? Shh.
That was so crispy.
Shades of Plans, we're now an ASMR channel.
Yeah, that's right. If we don't get money from that crack of Shasta, I don't know what media is all about.
It's the new intro.
All right.
You just reintroduced the new economy.
So we're going to discuss conspiracy theories and how they affect our lives or don't affect our lives.
Did you read the outline in any of its essence, or?
I did. I read the outline in all of its essence.
Okay.
I love that you I just like how you phrased that. It was perfect.
All right.
I read it in some
like the word essence.
So, is there something else you would like me to say, Jordan, here at the beginning of our conspiracy theory episode?
No, I just didn't know it was just on. Yeah, no, we're good. Just I'm gonna go with the punches.
Here's what I'm gonna say. I'm gonna redo intro and capture more of the essence of the discussion.
Maybe we could have cracked the camera, but I'll use that.
Did you mean this essence?
I will isolate that audio and have it right at the end of the Eye of the Storm intro, and it'll be like, and then
Perfect.
Spencer.
All right, today we are going to cover conspiracy theories, not as theorists, because we are not theorists, but just as observers of the conspiracies themselves. So I don't know if there's any particular approach or tactic I want to have going into this beyond having a little bit of fun discussing the things that are maybe real, maybe not real.
Should we talk about why we're talking about this today?
Yes, please.
Zach, go ahead.
Brian, that's very kind of you. Today we've come together because whenever you're watching or hearing this, there is a recent documentary on YouTube that came out that has gone up by 7 million views since its original upload. And
when was it uploaded?
Like 4 days ago.
I think it was the 10th.
I saw the views and it blew my mind. I was like,
right.
Holy cow.
Here's a conspiracy within a conspiracy. That video has never been on YouTube's trending page, despite its an exceptional performance and viewer count. So all four of us actually watched it. If you haven't seen it, I don't know if we would recommend it as much as we would say
interesting.
It's the funny thing is the person who recommended it to me was somebody who I wouldn't have expected to have it recommended. And I started watching it, messaged her back and said, "Is this the video you referred me to?" And then she messaged me back afterwards and she's like, "I am throwing up right now." I'm now caught up to where you were when you messaged me, and I just blindly promoted it to you. And at the end of the day, wow. What? Okay, Out of Shadows is a conspiracy type of documentary. Talks a lot about just this hidden agenda, particularly a connection between Hollywood, the CIA. It goes over things like Project Mockingbird, MK Ultra, to name a few, and then of course the ever-present, often memed Jeffrey Epstein, which in the year 2019, end of it, and now here in 2020. Has been quite a memeable individual. So that's kind of the context for this discussion, in that you start to go down any rabbit hole out there and you almost, and I'm speaking for myself, I almost immediately start to lose traction. I avoid conspiracy theories, not because I think they're a waste of time, but because I am incredibly afraid of their gravitational pull on me.
No, and here's the thing is I get sucked into the weirdest crap. Like I'll watch something like the title will be like mermaids are real, and I'm like, whatever, and I'll start watching this stupid documentary about mermaids, and I'll get to a point like halfway through, I'm like, well, maybe mermaids are real. Like I'm like, what's happening to me? I can't. See,
I'm of the same thing, except for I'm just pulled in because they're usually topless, so I have an issue with that.
So the premise of this documentary is that the federal government uses any means at their disposal in order to manipulate behavior or change ideas, badmouth other countries, promote, the deep state and CIA, the CIA purity and all sorts of stuff. I mean, for me, so I don't know. If I'm being honest, this conversation isn't all that interesting to me, and the reason is, I mean, the premise of the documentary is, a government organization manipulates behavior in order to achieve their goals.
Particularly through
Particularly like, through all the media sources.
Well, here's the other issue that I have. So two things. I'm a futurist, right? I'm thinking about the future rather than the past. This whole documentary is built on the fundamentals of what has existed for the last 60 years, which is cable television networks are a major source of information and our only source of information, right? Whereas, and here's the interesting part that I think you guys missed, the meta portion of this, the very idea that this information is available on YouTube proves that the information that we are no longer under control of the federal government, because
I have a theory that that would contradict that.
We could go meta and say maybe they want us to think that we have this free distribution of information.
Consider it as like a bunch of alien hicks out in the wilderness that are just weirdos.
So regardless of that, right, and you could go down several layers deep and say, well, this is another way that they wanted this to be exposed to us to further manipulate us. Whatever, it doesn't matter. I feel like everybody already believes this, that the federal government hides stuff from us, and they've been manipulating countries in the Middle East for decades, since 1920s or before that. It's like, look, we already know that this exists. So the fact that it should be surprising, I don't know. Now, the manner in which, like, whether it's aliens or whether it's, Jeffrey Epstein, or whether it's some pedophile ring that Hillary Clinton is associated with, like, I don't get super deep into the individual stories. I just accept the fact that some of them could be true. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole on any single one, because ultimately, I don't think we have the resources necessary to find out. And so it's not worth my attention.
And that's episode 6, guys.
Yeah, that's a wrap.
Well, and then, so I just think there's a lot of conspiracies that we could talk about that would just be a fun exercise in terms of how it's interpreted, how people try to spread the word about it, and how that can be a challenge. But I think, based on, Brian's comments, I think we could go into the allegory of the cave and maybe draw some comparisons to the different interpretations of a revelatory to some documentary, and then just what do we do with this information? And I think that it has not only present relevance but also future relevance, and we'll get into that. But just to sum up and give, well, does anybody want to volunteer as somebody who can give us a very brief version of the allegory of the cave?
Jordan. Easily.
Shut my door. Hey, could you shut my door? You can shut it if you want.
Jordan, who's your guest this week?
It's Aaron Parker. I was just asking.
Aaron, welcome to the podcast.
I'm gonna buy a bidet. So
you're gonna buy a bidet?
Yeah.
For our house.
Oh, you know what?
Well done.
Our buttholes will never be cleaner.
Does that sound good?
Yeah, actually, it does sound good. Yeah, I will compensate you a commission every time I take a crap. Okay, where were we? I'm gonna do some editing. Should we wait for Spence?
I think so. I mean,
we're
on the topic of the crap tax,
because I don't know if I'm as if I know it as well as you do, my friend.
Yeah, no worries. I think I can just say it. I just didn't want to be the one talking too much here.
I think you should go for it.
Okay, cool. Because I'll just give the piece of it that maybe has relevance to what we're talking about. I'm not even going to try to say that I'm going to say this perfectly, but basically the story goes that you imagine people who are chained to a wall in a cave. I'm not exactly sure why chained to a wall is relevant, more than just the idea that there are people in a cave. And outside the cave, there is the opening, and people are living life outside of this cave, and their shadows are being, projected onto the wall of these people in the cave. So they're not seeing out the door. It's like their back is somehow facing the door where the light is coming through, and they're able to see these shadows of people moving around, and that's all they know. So that to them is their reality. And basically what happens is, at some point they have the opportunity to, I don't know if somebody frees them. Basically, one of them gets the chance to see outside the cave, and they come back because it's such a shocking experience to depart from what you thought was real, and that some people would prefer that they stay in the cave, right, and not accept reality outside of it. So, it raises a lot of fundamental questions that I think are still relevant. Like, how badly do you want to know what's real? And, because I mean, Brian brings up a lot of practical viewpoints, like, okay, it's not a problem for me to accept that there has been high level manipulation from the government on down and into other more local organizations. And what can we do to fight it? What can we do to actually find the truth? Brian cited a lack of resources. And, for me, I think that, what do you just want to operate within the system that you believe you can control, or do you want to get outside?
So can we go down a quick science rabbit hole that I think is super interesting? And I know I've had this conversation with Jordan before, but I bought this 3D printed prism, which is essentially a 3D representation of a 4-dimensional object. Yeah, I'm a nerd like that, but hey, I don't apologize for it. So F you guys. I don't have to apologize for it.
Yeah.
So
we had our torches and pitchforks.
So
yeah, we were all upset.
Imagine this. So if you draw, so let's pretend we're talking in 2 dimensions right now. If you draw a square and a circle, right, inside of the square, if you are a 2-dimensional being outside of the square, you can't see that circle inside the square, right? Does that make sense?
If you're a 2-dimensional, so on a piece of paper, you're looking at it from the side.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
Okay.
You see the edge of the square, right?
For all the humans out there who aren't very smart, I will be your advocate here because I'm going to try to understand what Brian's about to say.
So once you take that 2-dimensional object, which is a square, and take it into 3 dimensions, right? Then you can see a ball inside of a box with a lid open, right?
Got it.
So as soon as you go 1 level up, 1 dimension up, what used to be invisible is now visible. Now, the reason why I think this is important is because if humanity got access to the 4th dimension, you could conduct surgery on an internal organ without actually breaking the skin.
CC.
How weird is that?
Could you? I don't understand why that would be possible all of a sudden.
Because
Maybe.
you're in a higher dimension. I'll send you a couple of YouTube videos to look up. But
oh boy.
So I think that is totally relevant because I think, maybe someday we'll develop the technology to be able to perceive or operate within the 4th dimension. That would be pretty cool. What we're talking about in terms of, 3-dimensional evidences and 3-dimensional proofs, I just think it's interesting that we have people who have at least tried to come after these conspiracies and show them. I think if the mentality was always, oh, well, I'm sure it exists, there's a high probability that it exists, whether I think that it's not worth interfering or what have you, we have evidence of people deciding to look into it and thereby exposing it so that we actually know it and can then increase our understanding of the probabilities of future conspiracy. So it is because of people trying to get to the bottom of conspiracies up to this present point that we actually have the perception that we do of conspiracies in general. Does that make sense?
So is the general definition of a conspiracy then something that has to involve a lot of people in order to keep a conspiracy quiet, or is it just something that's hidden from the public's eye by a select few? Like, I don't know exactly what makes a conspiracy, because you could say any particular lie told to the public and kept a secret by one guy or 5 is a conspiracy technically.
The technical term would just be like we're getting gain by lying. We're not exposing the whole truth and getting gain, and it doesn't have to be a public thing. It could be like you and me, Spencer, conspire against Brian and Zach with our hats, and there's some kind of symbolism with backward hat that they have no idea about.
It's true. Yeah.
Do you want the definition from dictionary.com?
Please.
A conspiracy is a belief that some covert but influential organization is responsible for a circumstance or event.
Got it.
And then interestingly enough, in the Out of Shadows documentary, they actually highlight that the term conspiracy theory was created by these co-conspirators as a way to discredit anybody who questioned the paradigm that they were trying to create, if that makes sense. So the word and the term itself was created as a discouraging tag for somebody trying to peer beneath or get behind the curtain, so to speak.
Almost like poking fun at the people who would even like, is that what you're saying? Like making fun of people saying, oh, it's a conspiracy. Now you're saying there's a conspiracy.
To me, I think it's just a proactive effort to, because they knew that people would ask questions. So, create an understanding of how do we deal with people who are actually going to try to get to the bottom of this. We'll call them conspiracy theorists, people who are, seeing something that isn't there and brand them as, crazy.
So the struggle I had when I was watching the whole documentary, and really with conspiracy theories in general, is I know that there are some truths that are being told to me. And I'm like, yeah, this is there are truths being thrown at me, but they're all shaped into this big underlying umbrella that would require,
so much effort and organization.
So much effort and organization and perfection to be able to maintain this particular conspiracy. So I guess I get sucked in by the truths, and then they, and then I'm left in a whirlwind. Yeah.
I think it's the fact that you have to be a logical thinker to even give conspiracy theories a chance. I think that whether it be subconscious or somebody mindfully going on an intellectual adventure, I think it's as simple as saying conspiracies have happened. This is known. They typically have to do with generally accepted knowledge. This is known. There is a chance that some element of my generally accepted paradigm and worldview is falsified and founded on something that somebody didn't want people to know.
Right.
And so then you say, well, where is it? And then it becomes an itch that's difficult to scratch, because you can't get to the bottom of every single rabbit hole, maybe even one in some instances, right? Like, just because if it happens to be a false, like a red herring conspiracy, then you'll just keep creating possible ideas that might accommodate that when there's nothing there to find. And whereas, obviously we've found that at least to some degree, there is an end to a conspiracy that is actually real, and, evidence gets pulled back and it's just known. I thought it was interesting that specifically that there was like church hearings, like a named church, not like religious hearings, in the House and the Senate, where leadership of intelligence groups within the United States just publicly acknowledged, like, yes, Project Mockingbird was something that was done to influence the public opinion through movies and media. Like, it's there. Now we have a precedent for conspiracies, and that just makes anybody, anytime they want to, you can look at any bit of news, you can look at any movie, and you could have that random thought come into you that says, is there a motive behind this? And some of them aren't, conspiracies. Maybe it's just blatant political stances, right? But you just wonder how much of even political ideas is manufactured and has no founding, whatever.
So I kind of wanted to bring it back to those are great points. Did anybody have anything to bounce off after Zach's?
No, go ahead, Jordan.
I just wanted to bring it back a little bit to the Plato's cave, because the Plato's cave, for me, is really intriguing in that it's basically showing we as humans, well, maybe I should ask, why do you guys think that we as humans long for this like explanation as to what is actually going on? Do you think it has to do with we feel in a way out of control, like our circumstances are outside of our control, therefore there needs to be something or someone that's manipulating them? Or is it just the drama of it all?
So I think there are there's probably multiple reasons why people get entrenched into conspiracy theories. If I'm being honest, I think a lot of it's just kind of interesting. It's learning something that not very many people know, or it's fun to hypothesize and think about what could be happening. That's it's just kind of a fun exercise for some people. For others, you know a lot of people just kind of suck at life, and so they want to think they want to think outside of this life, of maybe somehow this life is a lie and the government's lying to us and making my life terrible, and kind of deflecting um issues onto the ether rather than owning them themselves. So I don't know. I mean, I can see why people think that it's just kind of interesting to think about this stuff. I don't know. For me, I don't think there's a whole lot of utility in becoming a fan of certain things, and dedicating a whole social media profile to the uh 9/11 was an inside job or whatever it is. I just yeah, it's I will say I enjoy observing people who are fascinated by conspiracy theories. I'm a theorist of conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, yeah. That was essentially my question. I'm curious why is it like deep in our psyche as human beings to want to explain the unknowable, or is it just fun? Or maybe the fun is deep in our psyche.
I think it's both. It's yes and yes to that, because for me, I mean, I don't find a ton of utility into buying into conspiracy theories. But I do find it interesting to, sift through them and, look at what people are saying or why they're saying it. But at the same time, there's no way to get to the end of any of these rabbit holes. Like, it's not like we're going to gather all of this information and somehow have a perfect understanding of a particular situation. So it may just add stress. Like, I'm trying to imagine if I bought into some of the conspiracy theories, how much anxiety I would feel all the time just about everything, rather than just letting some things be and dealing with the life that is more simple.
Yeah. Well, if you consider, I don't want to bring too serious of a note into this, but religion in itself and the idea that mortality is separate from eternity, it could be seen as the most serious conspiracy theory
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic. This topic is obviously brought up in Sapiens, I think, Yuval Noah Harari, and there's several other books and experts that talk about this. That their hypothesis is that humanity existed for the date of the start of humanity continues to kind of go further and further out, just based on new evidence. Now it's, I think, hundreds of thousands of years out. But somehow when the agricultural revolution started 12,000 years ago ish, and people, instead of just dealing with their immediate tribe, started to need to interact with a bunch of people that they didn't know intimately. And so believing, the idea that essentially religion is an evolutionary response to finding a way to interact with people who you don't know and you can't trust. But if they believe in the same God you do, even if you don't know them, you believe that they're trustworthy. So, I do think that is, whether that is true or not, maybe that's a conspiracy theory, and maybe that's one that I'm very interested in. So maybe I am into this conspiracy theory stuff. But yeah, I guess that answers your question right there as to, why do people try and explain the unexplainable? Yeah, I don't know. For me, it's more a matter of, I don't, yeah, I'm just too practical and thinking about, you know, if I spent 5 hours researching different conspiracy theories, like what value would that add to my life? Maybe I'm just blissfully, happy with the small box that I live in, where I get to,
The
work from
cave.
home and ride a bike. And,
Great.
yeah. If I'm in the cave, then you know what? It's not a bad place.
I'm in the cave too,
It's
Bri.
perfectly skin temperature, so even though I don't have a blanket, I'm never cold.
Yeah.
Right. No, and I think that that's a kind of like an irony of it all is, it's like, it seems that regardless of your convictions, you get to a certain point where you're like, I am comfortable with this worldview. And, leaving it requires a certain level of discomfort. And I think that I think there are similarities between religious beliefs and conspiracy theories in that it's an itch that you kind of innately want to scratch. You want to get behind the curtain, and maybe you can in some fashion, maybe you can't. We don't know, and so the itch remains.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about conspiracy theories. I just want to go. I want to go through a list.
Chemtrails. Have you guys heard about chemtrails?
Chemtrails. I learned about chemtrails tonight.
Brian just.
I don't know that much about chemtrails, but I think it all falls into a category of like chemical use to manipulate the population. So you think, okay, if you had some, oh wait, what?
Nano dust.
Yeah. If you had some technology to where you could gain some sort of a, persuasive advantage. This was highlighted, by the way, in the groundbreaking film, Detective Pikachu. I don't know if anybody has seen it.
That was a big
but
one.
there is a substance R that comes from Mewtwo, a genetically man-made Pokemon that limits the mental control of Pokemon and makes them susceptible to control. Okay. I mean, it's a known fact. Look it up. And anyways, so there are these concepts of, because in our minds, we can conceive of, if there was such a substance that existed, you could drop it from planes. You could put it in the water supply. You could put it in you could extract it from a Pokemon in Rhyme City, and you could infect the population with a substance that allows you to control them. And I think that's the whole MK Ultra thing. What was it called? Operation or Project Paperclip, which was also highlighted in Out of Shadows, where, man, see, again, I'm already doing it. You're like getting into these connections. You're like, I got these ideas and these red threads flying all over.
So I thought chemtrails was, I just thought it was the airplane stuff, you know what I mean? Like the lines that come out of the airplanes.
Yes.
That you see in the sky. The government's kind of planted chemicals inside of there.
Here's some of the detail that I've heard on this chemtrails thing. Brian's not liking this.
So no, it's hilarious.
In his
I love
chair,
it.
like, no.
When I said nano dust, it was like kind of what Zach was referring to, but like they control what's in the air. These microscopic, almost camera like, I guess, microchips that can get into your blood system, into your digestive system, and they can figure out everything that's going on with biological creatures everywhere, enough to basically have control over everything.
Yeah, so
including the weather.
I think the general term for that is nanotechnology, which is, a hypothetical science that, many organizations are researching. And, I do think there's some merit in that. But in general, any conspiracy theory that has zero basis in science is just, I don't know. It's like the whole, the U.S. never made it to the moon in 1969 or whenever it was. Just there's so much, I don't know, Occam's razor, right? With the available evidence, if you've got multiple ways of explaining, the one that seems the most easy and the most likely to do should be the assumption. And I don't know, maybe when, a very hot air air is heated up very quickly and creates water vapor, which creates clouds behind. Could that be it? It seems a lot more likely than the government is controlling our thoughts and that the Earth is flat. I don't
Not
know.
only
Or
that, but
maybe the concept of Occam's razor is a government product because like, hey, don't think too hard.
Who is this?
Just think of the simple answer. It's just
no.
Occam.
But then it becomes too big is the thing for me. It becomes too big, right? The whole chemtrails thing becomes too big. Too many people need to be involved and keeping that a secret.
So what you're saying, it's more realistic to believe in the reptilians, like the Queen of England is a reptile.
Jordan,
no, I didn't say that.
it is more realistic to imagine that my microphone is being held up and moved around by nanobots. Hey, that's more likely than chemtrails.
One thing that we also reviewed this week was actually a single episode from the Portal podcast with Eric Weinstein. Shout out. I've recently come across him, and I gotta say, he is a compelling erudite.
He's a big fan of ours.
He talks about, it's funny because even in his video, he talks about responsible conspiracy theorizing. And one of the things that he talked about is the importance of precedents. So he says, and I mean, as a freelance conspiracy theorist, I have to say I somewhat disagree on the subject because he seems to say that if your conspiracy theory is based on something that hasn't happened yet, it can't be true or it can't be respected. And I'm like, well, before we found out about the other ones, like where was the conception of that idea until it was there, right? Anyways, again, I don't want anybody to think that I'm like really convinced of any and all conspiracy theories. I readily admit that it can be nothing more than like mental puzzles where as long as you can't find just a slam dunk heck no, and that isn't Occam's razor, then you're in trouble, right? So he just talked about how specifically when you're talking about like the media manipulation, okay, so we do know for a fact that there has been studies put into understanding how influential the media is. There has been MK Ultra, which was trying to leverage, psychoactive drugs to brainwash people, right? We don't know how far it got. We don't know if there was some breakthrough that we didn't know about, right? But there's a precedent for the pursuit of that type of capability. And so I think that's another reason why a lot of these conspiracy theories persist is it has been attempted. It has been arguably successful in some aspects. I mean, I actually have memories of being in like a third grade class where we learned about America, the Constitution. We learned about freedom of speech, and we're like, yeah. Our teachers would say that in other countries, like they repress the press and they don't have the right information. And in my mind, I was like, what? Even then, in like third grade, I'm like, what if my country does repress, the press, and this is a narrative that I'm being fed, and they're telling me that my country is special. And it's not. Oh no, what if that's true? But it was kind of like Spencer said, it was like, sometimes it's just too big for you to get.
Yeah. I will say, Zach, on that front, as a lightweight conspiracy theory, there's just this viewpoint within the United States that the U.S. is always the good guy. And I will say that is a large pile of disgusting brown, semi-solid, semi-liquid particles that I have excreted from a human body.
So Brian, I mean, I think that's interesting though, because it is in a sense a conspiracy theory that is very engaging, and it's information that I'm sure you've looked into, and I'm sure that it is information that you have disseminated to those who are willing to hear. And I would ask, like, so what's the difference between you saying that and saying that there's a high probability that there's been this narrative that is not 100% true, and what does that mean for us in America? What does that mean about our impact on internal politics? Do we have a responsibility to correct or to create some sort of ownership recompense for missteps?
So, I can only speak on an individual level, and I have power and authority over no one, not even my own son listens to me. So I feel like my only ability is to share information that is credible, extremely credible to those just in natural conversation and based on interests. So I think that in general, we as humans look at problems and try to solve them immediately, when if we take a step back and realize that the galaxy has existed for 14.9 billion years, and the fact that every generation is more educated and knowledgeable and intelligent than the last generation, everything that our parents or grandparents believed in is no longer going to be believed in by us and our future generation. So I think it's just a matter of time. We're learning that in this example, the government hides things from people in order to get leverage over other countries and manipulate the American population. And so we don't trust them. We don't listen to them. We don't take their word. We don't listen to the major news outlets. I mean, I don't know when the last time those were credible sources, but it's certainly been decades. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's just a matter of time before the government has the ability to even manipulate human behavior anymore, just because we already don't believe in it. We don't believe what they're telling us. So at least I don't, I don't know who does.
Sure, and I think that leads to dramatic consequences. I mean, one of the interesting things from the Out of Shadows and other people's takes on Jeffrey Epstein specifically is that it's possible, or somewhat conceivable, that he was a intelligence operative, potentially not connected to the United States, and that raises up a new set of questions that says that, in my mind, I kind of see it as this, which is, so we don't trust our local government. We don't trust our federal government. Do we know if there is malintent with the federal government? If there isn't, do we know if there's malintent with other countries? And what is the objective of these other places? And I think that we could potentially have an opportunity where, as a country, as a group of individuals, people might need to do something about misinformation or disinformation, simply on the possible risk of there being an influential, powerful enough player in this game that could lower your quality of life, that could prevent you, Brian, from being able to study what you'd like to study, that could prevent me from being able to talk about conspiracy theories in a casual conversation, that could limit the choices that you have. And I would posit that the limitation of those choices could be detrimental to a general well-being of an individual and a society.
It's not going to happen. There's no way it can happen.
I kind of agree with Brian in that there's so many movies that we have grown up with that are that show how this thing could be possible. And it has instilled, at least it's instilled in me, this rebellious attitude. If they ever try to control me, I'm just going to rebel or die, and maybe they'll know how to do it in a way that's like, I'm going to just submit to your wishes. But I kind of agree that I think there's too many free thinkers, at least right now. And I could be wrong. I mean, I do know that I mean, there's so many people that are, just giving heed to all the information, not saying it's false, about COVID, and I think it's correct, by the way. But if it was false, everybody's quarantining for a reason that they don't know, But that was a bad example because I actually believe that. So somebody save me.
So Zach, let me explain my answer. So we have seen Moore's law repeated over and over again, which Moore's law is essentially the law that states that computing power and the cost of producing electronics or other things decreases by a so the cost of computing and the capabilities are improving at an exponential rate. I think Weinstein mentioned something in one of his podcasts stating that, in the 1940s, only one or two or three world powers were powerful enough and had the expertise to create a nuclear weapon. But here in 50 years, some high school kid could create a nuclear weapon in his or her backyard, right? And so the reason I bring up that example is that I don't know. I'm just really scared. What I'm explaining is that governments, based on the limited technology that we have had access to in the past, it was much easier for organizations, governments, large corporations, in order to control behavior because our methods of consuming information were limited. Now, based on the whole theory of blockchain and distributed ownership of certain ideas and technologies, central governments will no longer, we have seen a trend over time that the organizations that used to control the way that we think and behave no longer do, because now guess what? This thing called YouTube exists where everybody can post, content. You can go into whether, Google filters that information, but it's already one layer removed of government control, and it's just going to continue. I mean, the trend is there. And so, yeah, it's just I think we're, the ability for organizations, governments to hide things from us, as they've done in the past, is a thing of the past for the most part.
And I think you're seeing that. Oh, sorry, Zach. And then I'm going to let you go. But I think we're seeing that already, Brian. I think we're seeing your point already, in that you could apply it close to home and say, for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, for years and years and years, we didn't have access to history right at our fingertips, or it's the information age. So stuff that, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily hidden, but stuff that wasn't present in front of the eyes of the members of the church for 200 years is now in front of everybody's eyes. So it's not something that can be hidden anymore. And I think that goes for most institutions. Like, you look at all the stuff that's come out in previous years where, Facebook goes under attack for privacy issues. And, there's all of these different organizations that are struggling with the information age, because gone are the days when you can just lie to the public, because at some point, somebody who's part of the conspiracy comes forward. And I think that's the beauty of the information age is, there's a ton of information. However, it's providing, it's forcing more honesty institutionally. Not that people aren't lying, but it's forcing more honesty.
For sure. I would make a far more insidious argument, or a more.
I love that word.
I would say that
insidious. Beautiful word.
I think that you could use Moore's law and apply it to the technology of behavioral engineering. This is me just poking holes, just because I want to. What if a much more reliable understanding of perception and behavioral engineering was discovered from the horrible deeds and methods of Heinrich Himmler, MK Ultra, results of Project Paperclip? Let's say that some code was cracked in terms of interpreting and understanding human behavior that was not publicly shared. And then you can say Facebook and other entities have, I would say that the technology went further than maybe even these companies understood, and obviously further than government could catch up to in terms of preserving that privacy. So what is being done with this incredible international awareness of some human behaviors, coupled with a this desire that apparently has been represented throughout the human story of controlling people, whether that be in interpersonal relationships, local groups, or entire countries, or countries that share and are allies in some way. I would say, what if, I don't think it's such a crazy stretch to say, what if there is some sort of coaching and engineering of certain perceptions that are based on disinformation?
Zach, was that a question? Was that a statement? Was that just slam poetry without the rhythm?
Was it hard to understand?
No,
it was very
clear.
clear.
You were phrasing it as if it were a question, and then you went into like a monologue, and then what if, and then you went into a monologue, and then what if. It was just very it was very lyrical.
It was lyrical and beautiful,
structured as I was just waiting for you to start hitting the beat. And
no, it was a rhetorical journey of sorts.
Do you guys mind if we take a bio break brought to you by Diet Shasta, caffeine-free grapefruit?
And then let's sing at the end of this one. But yeah, I gotta watch where I pee.
I'm telling you guys, I have never met young individuals who pee as often as you three. I mean, Zach, do you need to pee right now?
No, I mean, I felt bad because it was right when we started recording that I had to go. So I went to try to prevent a mid-flight pee.
But I'm baffled. I'm baffled at what I'm experiencing in this podcast. I've never seen it before. Maybe I'm not drinking enough water, but I can.
Or maybe you're the least nervous person here.
Well, I can chug a lot of water and not have to pee for an hour. Like, it's
like I said, maybe it's nerves. Maybe right as we were getting started, I just got so nervous and scared. I just said, "Oh, I gotta pee."
You gotta tinkle. You gotta tinkle when you gotta tinkle.
Maybe my rhetorical journey created an autonomic response. This uncontrollable evacuation of the body's non-essential fluids to fight or flight. And
I think you make a solid point there. It might be a bit of a conspiracy, but I'm in. No, Zach, you're lyrical, and I'm not deep enough to consider the depth of what you are wanting me to consider. I can't do it.
Well, what if we extend the metaphor and make the allegory even broader for the cave? And let's say that these cave inhabitants find a mirror on the ground, and they're able to look around the rock that their back's up against, and they actually can see color. And they can see like the people walking by, and they can draw their own conclusions from that. They've made progress in their awareness of the world outside the cave, but it's still not the whole truth. But they might be content with what they've found.
And the problem with that allegory, and I'm sure, I mean, the allegory acknowledges this already. There's not a point in human life where you are completely outside of the cave, holding on to or seeing visually the entire truth. I don't think that ever happens.
If these other dimensions exist, I think that's exactly what it's saying.
Can I just say that from dialogue that I've heard from those who have experimented with various psychedelics, the idea of stepping out of the matrix sounds awfully like an acid trip. So I suggest we do a group acid experience.
Oh, like on Zoom. We can do it over Zoom and quarantine, all four of us.
Hey, Zach, doesn't your wife have a mushroom guy? A shroom guy? Doesn't your wife have a shroom guy?
Mushroom guy. No, I don't think she has a reliable mushroom contact right now. She has dabbled in the psilocybic journey back in a former life.
I feel like that's.
Not sure if we should volunteer that information.
I feel like that's a class at Hogwarts, psilocybic arts.
Perhaps. But and if we wanted to go down the whole psychedelics road, that is a road I have walked down a little bit too. Like this curiosity in DMT, psilocybin, more specifically for me, I think one of the most compelling things, and I don't know if I'd ever do it, is ayahuasca.
That's what I
The,
was saying.
the controlled camp or whatever.
Dude, they have like retreats.
Yeah.
Remember Mike Dutry? I mentioned him before. Full name. I'm not gonna delete it. He went on a ayahuasca retreat and told me everything, and it sounds amazing, but it also sounds horrible.
Interesting.
There is some. I would, anybody who's listening to this, if you're still with us, I think you should take a look at some of that, because one of the most shocking things that people report from either DMT or ayahuasca is a uniform experience across the board. So it's not like maybe some of these bad acid trips where somebody thought they were a banana and they attempted to peel themselves with a cheese grater or whatever, whereas others feel super happy, or whatever the case may be. Like in this,
why was that always the story? By the way, that was always, I heard that.
I think that was from the DARE program.
Times. Yes, in the DARE program every year in school, I was like, man, I'm gonna peel myself like a banana. Like, that's freaking insane.
Yeah.
Anyway, keep going.
This is your brain on drugs. So I think it's just interesting because we talk so much about the inner subjective experience and how it's so hard to bring it all together. And I think there's why there's such openness to, hey man, whatever your truth is, that's cool. But I think exceptions to that rule should be very talked about, because I'm not an expert in whatever, but apparently with these experiences there is almost always a successive sequence of events, and then there is variance in people addressing past wrongs, past traumatic experiences, and in many cases people are able to advance beyond that and kind of get some closure. There's been some studies around the microdosing of psychedelics for treatment of PTSD. So there's something there that is either unlocking, perceptions beyond what we typically see, or maybe some sort of a metaphorical, the brain's filling in a blind spot in some cognitive way to explain emotions that people are experiencing. I don't know. But I do think that it is remarkable that it is such a consistent experience for people who use certain substances, and what that could potentially mean.
I think there's a consensus then. I think all those in favor.
Well, you're the only one raising your hand. Oh, Zach gave the maybe. I have a personal conspiracy theory experience that I want to share.
Ooh.
So what's the old guy who was a senator for like 20 years? Orrin Hatch?
Orrin Hatch.
Mm-hmm.
Orrin Hatch. So back in, 2016, I think 2017 probably, I worked at Qualtrics in Provo, and Orrin Hatch came, did a speech for the whole company, and one of the founders of Qualtrics is very liberal, left-leaning, and they were just kind of joking back and forth about politics, and Orrin said the word conservative or Republican right next to honest, like 4 times in a row. Like, oh, the conservative path is just, what I see is the more honest path. And he repeated it a bunch of times. And I was just like, I know you've got a behavioral engineer on your staff that's telling you, hey, if you just say honest and Republican a bunch of times in a row, you're going to get really dumb people to believe in it. And I, most of, Qualtrics is a very intelligent crowd. And I remember a bunch of us just kind of looking at each other like, are we all seeing this? Does he not know who he's talking to?
So that's a similar thing that was happening on The Office when Kelly liked the new boss, Charles. So she'd keep walking in the office and going, Charles, you wanted me. She's like, I figure if I say he wants me enough, he'll eventually want me.
I think that's called Russell. I was looking it up because I remember Eric Weinstein talked about that. Russell's conjugation, emotional conjugation. illustrating a human's tendency to describe their own behavior more charitably than the behavior of others. And you use these emotive words that can, on a subliminal sort of level, override the rational thought. Like you attach something to an emotional concept and it kind of creates a blind spot rationally. So again, also no stranger here to bipartisan persuasive techniques, right? We've seen many from both sides of the aisle. I think all of us in this group are somewhat disenchanted with the bipartisan approach. Not to try to make any sort of political statement here, but yes, we are aware of that level of manipulation in sales, in marketing, there's been a lot of this like lower level mastery of what can manipulate people, which I think again is a universal thing, that humans have been manipulated and tried to manipulate each other in a variety of ways for as long as we've known the human story. But what does it mean? Can it be exercised on a grand scale? Like I'm theorizing potentially that there is this dangerous invisible hand influencing not just maybe American politics and mentalities, but global ones. I don't know.
Zach, can you say that just a little more rhythmically so that I can just dance to it?
I'm doing something with a cadence then?
No, it's just I feel like your long monologues are just like, man, that's artwork right there.
Yeah, you eloquently stitched together.
What if there is more than what we are seeing?
Whoa, man.
Good effort. All right, I want to like fire off some conspiracy theories you guys have heard and say valid or stupid.
Sounds good.
I just want to do that.
I might be able to contribute a few more after it, just in case you don't fill them all.
All right. Well, do you have the list in front of you, Jordan, or does someone have a list in front of you that we just want to start like spitting out?
And do we have a category? Do we have categories to like? Do we have a rubric for this judging?
Like, I have the top 10 here by Time Magazine.
Okay.
Ooh, let's do the top 10.
Top 10.
Hold on. Let me look. Okay. Are we going to talk about Bob Lazar, Aliens, Area 51? Because, man, that one has legs. I'm telling you.
Oh baby.
Dude, that one has great legs.
Here's the deal. We were talking about Sasquatch before we started this at our dinner. And I'm just saying, I won't name names. There's several people in my family that are.
It's Kane.
Dude, there's some deep believers in the Squatch, man.
Are they the Squatch believers like of the Orthodox pioneer stock, or more just like lately?
I think just based on recent experiences, not necessarily in a Mormon context. But let me share this one story real quick before we jump in. So we were up at the Wind Rivers, in the Uinta Mountains, beautiful. It's me, my dad, my brother, and my father-in-law. And we get up there. You're in the middle of nowhere, up on the Indian Reserve side of Wind Rivers, and we're camping. Got a fire lit, and all of a sudden, just from silence, we hear a scream. Like it wasn't a scream of like an animal or an elk. It was just like I'm going to imitate it. It's going to be embarrassing.
Don't wake up your kids. Don't wake up your kids.
Like, I'm not kidding. Okay, that's how this thing.
Charmander.
Yeah, Charmander. Pikachu. So we hear this scream go off, and all of us just kind of like sit there in silence and look at each other like, that's a weird one. And then it goes on like 2 or 3 more times, and it's like one of those screams where you're like, that doesn't sound like an ant, like it's not an elk, or it's not like I don't know what that is. It wasn't a roar. It was like almost human, but almost not. So my father-in-law, there was like cows across the way. So we're like, maybe it's cows. But my brother and I were sleeping in hammocks, and I hung mine up like 12 feet in the air. Because I'm like, how tall is Sasquatch? I don't know. I just gotta put this thing up high. So I bought in at this point, and the mountains will do something crazy to you. But I'm laying in the bed, and at 2 a.m. again, scream so loud. And Pearson is like, dude, did you hear that? I'm like, bro, there's something out there. So when we get back where I have internet service, we're having this conversation sitting around as a family. And I'm like, you know what? There's got to be an explanation. There were cows out there. So I Google cow screams. That's what I Google, cow screams. And sure enough, dude, I pushed play on this video and this cow is screaming like a freaking human. I'm not even jaying you. So I was like, okay, like it settled it in my brain. I was like, oh, good, no Sasquatch. Like I had to like wipe my hands clean of that. But it was just this weird. It's weird how I don't know. Dude, things can mess with your brain with stuff like that.
Goat screaming videos, because you've seen those.
Yeah.
No doubt.
the goat screams, man.
Hey, do you guys remember my brother's gorilla suit that we used to wear to people's parties and house? I can guarantee you there's probably at least a handful of old timers in Alpine that are just be like, no lie, Sasquatch walked straight across my driveway.
Wait,
dude, I remember bringing it up to the Broadbents, like way up in Alpine, like where nobody else lives. It's just kind of like,
guys.
Oh, you're talking about Fort Canyon?
Somebody saw us up there.
I think we are solving a problem for a family member that I just had dinner with. I'm not kidding. So he was out with his brothers, 12 years old, 12 or 13 years old, right around the age when you guys we'd be meandering around. I'm not kidding. He said they just finished a hike. They lived right in that area in Alpine, and he looked up on the hill, and there was a freaking Sasquatch running down the hill. And when we're having this conversation, he's like, I'm not kidding, Spencer. I saw a Sasquatch. You know what I mean? He's like, he was seriously like, bro, no, you didn't. But he was like pretty adamant. So I'm curious if we've just resolved a concern that he's had since the age of 14.
Just let him keep believing it. Just let him go. But
well, hopefully he doesn't listen.
Yeah, we should ping every contact that we have in Alpine and just be like, hey, do you have any neighbors who have had Sasquatch sightings?
With us. Sorry.
Oh, all right, top 10. Let's top 10.
Let's hear it.
Boy.
Okay, the number one. Well, actually, it doesn't list them. It just does bullet points. This is Time Magazine's top 10 conspiracy theories of all time. The JFK assassination.
The grassy knoll.
The grassy knoll. The umbrella man. The 9/11 cover-up. Do you want me to go through these as quick?
Wait. Let's pause. JFK. So help me understand this one clearly. So this was the idea that it wasn't just one person that tried to kill JFK. It was multiple different people at the same time. Is that the experience we're talking about? Yeah. I didn't know if that was the particular.
It's more of just like there's a conspiracy to kill JFK. Because there's so many of them, aren't there? Like there wasn't just this one hick guy from Texas.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot on Wikipedia about that one. Yeah. I will say I'm not as informed on that one.
I don't know that one.
I think I'm going to take a Brian stance on this one and just say I think something was all rigged, and I'm good with that.
It's reasonable with this one that it was rigged, but yeah. So that's that. This
next one,
the 9/11 cover-up or the Twin Towers was a conspiracy. A lot of people would suggest that it was Vice President Cheney, his interest in oil abroad, that led to a 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center, and so that we had an excuse to go in and start a war on terrorism in the Middle East.
Interesting.
I don't know if there's a ton. I haven't gotten too deep into it, but I will say it was very convenient that it fit George W.'s agenda. And I remember on my mission, people talking about 9/11 in Brazil, just being like, oh man, you guys just went in there to get oil, and everybody one after the other, it's all about oil. And I was just thinking like, no, it's about honor and dignity and correct morals, and terrorism is
The
just
war on terror.
bad. Yeah, and it's interesting.
Yeah.
In Argentina, they accuse the U.S. of stealing their water, so that's a thing as well.
I heard that in Brazil as well. People were like, what's going to be? There's going to be a shortage of in the future? Fresh water. Guess who has the largest quantity of fresh water in the world? Boom, the Amazon. They're coming for us, but we're not letting them have our water.
Well, isn't it the Great Lakes, or is it the Amazon? I was going to say the Great Lakes got to be competing in that battle.
I don't know, but I think we should take about 5 hours offline and do some research and see if we can find the answer and see if that improves our lives.
But I don't like, how could 9/11 be a conspiracy? First, like, really? Like 2 planes flew into a building that were, you know what I mean? And you've got audio from some of those planes. You got, I mean, I just, that seems kind of,
it's a long stretch.
It would be a big stretch.
Like one of the large.
Well, again, you could see that there would be this coordination where interested parties get their needs met. That maybe there was some sort of contact with these terrorist groups, and doors were opened and alluded to.
That just seems insane, though,
It
Zach.
does.
That's crazy.
I'm not denying that, but I'm also saying that this is that itch I'm telling you about. It's conceivable.
You're scratching.
It's conceivable that some entity could leave a trail of breadcrumbs that could even make these groups think that they're acting of their own volition and opportunistic effort.
I could see a world in which, George W.'s regime was poking around the Middle East trying to rile them up because, hey, we want an excuse to invade and gain some power in this region.
He was trying to rile them up.
But yeah, I could see that, happening. But the government orchestrating the attack, I just don't think that's possible. I think
he was trying to orchestrate it. He was trying to make it work.
Hey, we got some nuclear weapons.
He was ponderizing.
I honestly think it's wild because I'm not doing a good job of thinking of examples, but I think have you guys ever witnessed some security measure or seen something in life where you're like, oh crap, if I was a bad person, I could exploit that? Has that ever happened to you ever? Or am I just a bad person?
Just when someone dropped
exploit it.
Just when someone dropped Skittles on the floor of a grocery store and I was like, ooh, they're everywhere. I could pick one of these up.
Zach, I learned that lesson in 3rd grade when I realized that if I just coughed a couple times, my teacher would send me to the nurse's office and the nurse would give me Jolly Ranchers. So yes, I think that people manipulate weak scenarios all the time.
Well, no, maybe it's more in retrospect, but like when we found out that how they hijacked the planes and did that, you think to yourself, wow, that was just like right there. And then they did that and it created a new, security measure and system. And there are just a handful of instances where I don't know if it was in public places or something. And man, I hope this isn't like a thing, and I've never had a desire to carry out any sort of an awful thing, but I've been in situations where I'm thinking, like if somebody was a bad person and they wanted to do the things that I know other humans have done, they could do that, and it freaks you out that people, that there are these different points in public life or something where there are security measures, but it's not like all the way there. And people can take advantage of it. And I don't even know where I'm going with this, other than that if I can conceive this, and I have no desire to carry out any sort of a terrorist act, like,
after Zach.
I don't know. Like it's scary that there are these windows of opportunity that maybe we haven't closed as well as we could or should. And this is not where I expected this conversation to go. But again, I guess it's speaking more to people are smart, and if somebody's a bad person and you're working against smart people, there's what are they capable of doing? I don't know. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
So along with the 9/11, before we move on to the next one, isn't there the big theory that the sorry, did I skip out there for a second? Isn't there a big theory that the Pentagon, it wasn't a plane because people were saying, oh, where's the plane debris? And the hole wasn't big enough for a 747. It was caused by something else. So I looked into this one before we even came on here, and where you get all legitimate information, Snopes. Obviously that was a joke, but I went to Snopes just to look into this just briefly, and to a couple of other articles. And I mean, there was plane debris, right? But when something smashes into a side of a building, one, it's a government building built with basically indestructible windows, you know what I mean? So they're like explosion proof and all of that stuff. So I mean, this plane was obliterated. So anyway, point is, there was plane debris. So anyone that believes that Pentagon one, again, to Zach's point, I don't know, but all right, let's move to the next one.
It's conceivable.
It's inconceivable.
Why do they keep using that word? I don't think it means what it's Area 51 and the aliens.
Ooh.
Yes. Yeah. Brian, hit it.
So, yeah, Bob Lazar was interviewed once or twice on the Joe Rogan podcast. I think he's been interviewed a couple of other times, and there's a Bob Lazar Netflix documentary, I think.
I just Googled it and I saw it. I was like, ooh.
It's worth a watch, and it's worth listening to those conversations. So here's the thing, there's so many crazy people out there that claim that they were abducted by aliens, but most of them are just crazy people that really want attention. Usually when someone claims to have experienced something extraordinary, there's some type of motive behind that, which is, I'm lonely, I need people's attention or something. But this guy, Bob Lazar, who was an engineer at, Area 51 and some of the sites there, essentially, told his whole story, has never profited off of this story. He's very introverted, does not like to be in the limelight. And, I've heard Joe Rogan multiple times be like, look, I've talked to a lot of people who spit a lot of bullshit, and this guy did not trip the bullshit meter at all.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because this guy, what he does is he was an engineer that worked on the studied and did research around the propulsion system, and every time he was asked, did you see any aliens, what did they look like, he would be like, no, I didn't see that, no, that wasn't my thing. He wouldn't. I feel like a normal person would be like, oh yeah, I saw, but multiple times when he was asked about, oh, and did you see this or that? And he's like, no, I wasn't exposed to that. They keep roles very siloed and keep people separate so that nobody has a full understanding of what's going on. So yeah, that is
Lazar claims he
fascinating.
examined an alien craft that ran on antimatter, reactor powered by element 115.
And
Lazar.
element 115 was proven true multiple years after his claims.
No.
The U.S. government went through a couple of his universities and had the universities extinguish his records from ever having been studied there, and they removed any history of him actually working at Area 51 until there are newspaper articles that were talking about this Bob Lazar guy who was that talked about, hey, he was an engineer at this place. And so certainly the government did things to try and cover up the story. Whether or not everything he talks about is true or false is up in the air. But I'll say this, that guy definitely passes the bullshit meter test.
Well, let's pause for a second.
Believable.
This is what I need to read. I know I'm talking way too much. Criminal convictions. Ready? In 1990, Lazar was arrested for aiding and abetting a prostitution ring. This was reduced to felony pandering, which he pleaded guilty. He was ordered to 150 hours of community service. So there's one thing that does that mentioned in the Netflix special or no?
I think, yeah, I remember him mentioning that, they were trying multiple things to kind of sully his name and discredit what he was saying. And so I think that was one. I can't remember the exact story behind that, but
you just have to get a vibe from the guy. It's pretty good. I mean,
interesting. Okay, I'm gonna watch that one.
Yeah.
All right, number 4.
Next one, 4. Paul is dead. The Beatles. That everybody thinks that that he's actually still or that he died and there's like a doppelganger. Paul McCartney.
I'm pretty sure Paul McCartney and Elvis Presley are hanging out wherever they are because they're both still alive.
Definitely.
And Tupac.
And the 3 Nephites. They would hang out with Tupac.
And
All right,
Sasquatch.
Next one.
Okay.
I don't even know why that's a conspiracy theory. What, like?
It's strange, yeah. I mean, some people think that the Beatles never actually existed. It was like all just strange.
Is that why they made that movie just recently?
What's their gain? Yeah. Which it reminds me, I have a question after the list here that I think is a really good question. The next one though is secret societies control the world. Well, that's weird. I don't know what that. I think what they mean by that is like people like the Rothschilds,
Illuminati.
the Illuminati. The documentary we just watched, Out of Shadow, more of a Hollywood secret society, Satanists, deep state, etc. That control the world. Who is it specifically? We all know. All right.
And that's a strong itch I have. I'm not going to deny it. I don't know for, I won't say like absolutely, but that's one that maybe it's an itch that's hard because maybe it like violates so much of my cave, that like, what if there's this like multinational entity, they're all self-interested and, they manufacture this misdirected conflicts that kind of keep us like fighting over stuff that's missing the real issues,
Are you describing all the villains in all the Marvel movies together?
Dude.
No, I'm talking more about in Black Panther, the special units that worked to destabilize nations and carrying on those practices. I think that was also
or
Out of Shadows.
The League of Shadows.
In another episode, Zach, we are going to give you the floor to do a poetic rendition of all of your deep state beliefs.
Go off, monologue.
All right, what's the next one?
The next one is probably the most famous, in my opinion. The moon landings were fake.
Yes.
We all have a pretty close friend that we went to high school with that is convinced. Worked.
Can you say a name that rhymes with his first and last name?
It'll just be said. What's funny is, what were you gonna ask?
It was to bankrupt the Soviet Union, right?
Just
this fictitious race to space,
like in Interstellar. I think it was a great use of propaganda to bankrupt the Soviet Union so that we could win the Cold War. You don't think we went to the moon? Anyway. Yeah, but one of our good friends he's like, we didn't go to the moon. Absolutely.
Yeah, aren't there like pictures the pictures where the flag is like
because they put it up. They have a pole across. Anyway, you guys should go watch the movie documentary Apollo 11 because it has all the other footage from. It's not just like the one that we see that was broadcast in 1969 or whatever it was. It's all the other footage from, the station, from Houston, from everywhere. So
it'll quiet those conspiracies just a skosh.
Bit. Yeah.
All right.
Okay,
All right.
This next one I actually believe. Yeah.
It's true.
If not her, then someone. Jesus and Mary Magdalene.
We're married.
They were a thing.
Yeah, they were a thing.
Well, it's possible. I don't know. I don't know how I would believe that beyond like the experience that they, he came to her first.
I think
Like came and visited her first after the resurrection would be the biggest indicator.
Well, yeah, it might not be married, but the thing is that to be a rabbi, you had to be married at the time. I mean, I don't
interesting.
think there's any doubt that Jesus was married.
Can I piggyback one additional? I guess you could call it a religious conspiracy theory. So, John Allegro was an expert that went and studied some Dead Sea Scrolls that were found just outside of the Dead Sea. They were dated to be like 200 years before Christ, and were using phrases like the Son of God and things that, and talking about baptism, and used various phrases as if like Jesus were there. Essentially was talking about Jesus like 200 years before. And he was the only one who studied these scrolls. And he was the only one who studied the scrolls that was not religious or was not Christian. And his conclusion as to what they were and what the scriptures are is a misrepresentation of maternal like birthing rituals and psychedelic acid trips, meaning psychedelics were a way to commune with God or experience various religious things. So they were the case that he brought forward is that the scriptures were a way to hide in plain sight from the Romans and other invading threats, their psychedelic rituals within scripture. So that's a very interesting take on religion.
Yeah. Well,
what was that guy's name?
John Allegro. I remember you bringing him up before, and I remember looking that up and seeing that again, that reference to psychedelics, and that again, there's another itch in me that feels like I wonder if
yes, we need to have an experience.
There are psychedelics that can tap into this other frequency or this other dimension. I just wonder if that's something.
There's only one way to find out.
He was on the Joe Rogan podcast as well. John Allegro?
No, I think he's been dead for a while. Yeah, he's been dead for a while.
Well, why does it say?
Oh, you're talking about the one that played?
He's been referenced several times on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Okay, that's what I'm seeing now. Thank you.
Have you guys heard of the stoned ape theory? It's also something that I saw on the Joe Rogan podcast, but it's this theory that the rise of the exceptional human consciousness and intellectual capability, imagination, all that kind of stuff, is from a habitual consumption of mushrooms. There's a guy who studies fungus. I think he's John Stennett or something. I can't remember his name, but
Stamos?
He talked about he just said that there's a theory out there that the rise of human consciousness was from tribal consumption of psilocybin, because it was because there are these different dates about human origins in Africa or whatever, and in the region they believe that there was plentiful of mushrooms there, of these psychoactive mushrooms, and that the consistent consumption of mushrooms created this growth in empathy and consciousness, and that is the origins of the evolution of the human mind. And so it's interesting. I wonder how much merit there is to that. I don't know. And there's just kind of this discussion around psychedelics. It's interesting.
That's awesome. Okay, next one.
I like it.
Next theory.
Next theory is Holocaust revisionism.
What is that?
I think it's a pretty good one, but I'm not familiar with it. I think this one has to do with the Heinrich Himmler a little bit. Although Holocaust revisionism, I'm not totally sure. It might.
All right.
Yeah.
Google it.
Something to do with Civil War and like the Marvel movies. Okay, the next one is the CIA and AIDS. I know some of you probably know more about this one than I do.
I don't know anything about that.
Okay, they mentioned it briefly in Out of Shadow.
Although CIA spelled
CIA?
backwards is ache. Oh.
Ooh, I see what you did there.
And the letter after C is D. So AIDS. Okay. I
Right.
see how it all works.
Yeah.
And when you get Zach rubbing his face, that's how you know you've really gone a wrong direction.
You really screwed it up.
Or I have some anti-itch cream in that spot of my brain. I don't know.
I think the basic assumption that I have is that the CIA went into some regions where they wanted to create a vulnerability or disable certain groups and basically planted AIDS or HIV.
Don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
I looked at the Holocaust revisionism really quick, just as a quick one, but this one's kind of shocking. It says that basically the story of 6 million Jews being killed in concentration camps is a myth.
Yeah.
And then it was all a political ploy to
No.
It says, called the Holocaust a myth, suggested that Germany and other European countries, rather than Palestine, provide land for a Jewish state. So it was.
That's where it gets scary. Not in that that's true. It's scary that people come up with that kind of stuff. Much like the flat earthers, in my opinion.
Yes, because flat Earth is bizarre.
Now that the generation is completely gone, like mostly every single person that survived the Holocaust is dead. I'm pretty sure it's like maybe 1 or 2 people. We can come up with theories like that and not disprove them. But there's some primary sources on like that documentary that came out, The Devil Next Door, where there's people in the 80s that lived through the Holocaust and they talked about it and they were very emotionally distraught and had. But I can just see, that's an issue with the future.
Yeah, or Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning.
Right. Yeah. What if we censor books? Like that's the reason why a lot of George Orwell will write about burning books, or that's why Hitler burned books, is so that we don't have an idea of what has happened in the past, and then we can just make up all sorts of crazy stuff.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think that's something that's contemporarily interesting because there's a lot of talk around nihilism and just the dangers of distrusting everything that you haven't yourself experienced, right? And that it discounts like the value of some stories being passed down that represent the cumulative wisdom of humanity, and some of that you could argue is maybe misguided and archaic, but also contains at least a modicum of valuable information that can allow us to not make the same mistakes that have been made in the past. And I think that's
Well, I think people are doing it already with like the founding of the United States. I mean, it's pretty trendy and cool to think that it was founded on some crappy principles. I know it's trendy and cool to think it was founded on like holy inspiration as well when we were growing up. But I think you got to look at all the history in detail in the primary sources before you jump to a conclusion that they were all racist in the modern perspective.
And the CIA and the AIDS thing is probably maybe more relevant in our current COVID situation, where there's the conspiracy theory that it was a virus created by the CIA to wipe out homosexuals and African Americans.
Right.
There you go.
Wowza.
That was the explanation for AIDS or for COVID-19?
For AIDS. So there are those who there is debate and contestation in regards to the origins of COVID-19. Was it man-made, or was it really this zoonosis between a bat and a person? And how are we tracking that? Is that reliable? Blah, blah, blah.
I heard that the U.S. government created COVID-19 and that they created a backdoor that if anybody just said, "God bless America," then they're immediately cured. So that's pretty interesting.
That's amazing.
And I've recently come across from a mutual friend of ours a lot of information that freaks me out a little bit about Bill Gates, the World Health Organization, in response to COVID-19, the fact that there is like a World Health Organization facility in Wuhan where, supposedly
I call it
originated.
Wuhan.
Wuhan.
Mm-hmm.
Is it, again, there's these,
You mean the Hubei province? Is that where you mean? Okay. Got it.
Yeah, more generally speaking, the Hubei province. Well, I thought it was the Wuhan province, or am I wrong with that?
I think Wuhan is a city in
all very small areas.
Hubei province.
Gotcha.
Very little population.
All right, what's the next conspiracy theory?
Well, this is the last one on this list of the top, and it is the reptilian elite. Yeah, look this one up. This is a crazy one. The reptilian.
This is like Hillary Clinton's an alligator, or what is it?
Yeah, and the Queen of England, and there's all sorts of
While you guys are looking this up, here's a theory. The United States government created conspiracy theories to give us something fun to think about late at night so that then we go to sleep and we wake up and we continue to be very good factory workers who contribute to a growing GDP.
Okay, let me just say, Brian, good point. Let me just say, reptilian elite sounds a little bit like the hollow earth type thing, right?
Yeah.
Is that all like linked somehow?
I guarantee.
I know there's like the hollow earth theory where there's people living inside the planet in the core.
It's on the back of the dollar bill.
It's been right in front of us.
It's kind of flat earth theory. I mean, the map of flat earth is right there on the crest of something.
Guys, let me just say, when I pull up this reptilian elite theory on my freaking iPad and see this picture as my first,
Sauron, then
I immediately say, okay, so that's a lie.
Yep.
Can you imagine how many people in Arkansas look up that stuff and actually believe it? No offense to Arkansas, but actually, yes, offense to Arkansas. You're a terrible state.
Okay, they're not listening.
Be ashamed of yourselves.
Hey, pump the brakes, Bri.
I'm
like
sorry.
all states
Just because they had a child with their sister doesn't mean that their children are mutated.
This insult has been brought to you by Diet Shasta.
Let's just perpetuate stereotypes, irrespective.
I can't say anything to anything that you guys have said. The right side of my screen has really gone haywire. All right, guys. I think we're bumping up on 2 hours here. So anything else you want to say? I have nothing to say beyond. I'm not a major conspiracy theorist, but talking about them makes me laugh and actually puts a smile on my face.
Yeah, definitely.
The outro should be a cow screaming, maybe.
A harmonized cow scream.
Dude. I wish we could do a Shasta song, a Diet Shasta song.
Yeah, with the little clicks and then they're over and over again.
Guys, I'm really glad we've had this opportunity to discuss conspiracy theories for 2 hours. It's been a pleasure.
It's going to be worth everyone's time.
This is going to
really.
be our least successful episode yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
Dude, watch it. No, man, watch it take off. People love conspiracy theories.
I guarantee you'd be like, these guys are hilarious. No, they're not.
The first person that actually watches this episode this far through and sends me a Facebook or Instagram message, I will give you $20. No,
you'll give him a Diet Shasta.
I'll give you $20. I'm curious to see if anybody actually makes it this far through. $20 is on the line.
Let's skip ahead.
All right, boys.
Flip. Okay. All right.
Okay, love you. Bye.
That's a wrap.